And we have about 20 throughout the United States. There are in places where we do not have the official consulates or consulate generals with diplomats from Switzerland. And they are usually like your, the Hitz the John Hitz, they are people in the community, for example in Detroit or Salt Lake City, who are business people, who know very well the area, who have good relations to the government, and who are there in fact to promote the good relationship between Switzerland and the United States. And so that is in fact how we do it with our system throughout the United States. And I would just to finish saying that I am very, very proud to meet you all here. I think it's unique that you have this spirit of family reunion. I think it's an important part in your history, and I wish and I hope it goes on, because I see a lot of young people, and please just try to continue and keep up this spirit of migration and keeping up with the history of your roots. I think it's fantastic that you do that. I wish you good luck. Have a wonderful stay here. Enjoy the moment here at the embassy, and later on, as you know, we will have this tour at the residence where you will see another part of our modern Switzerland, and I wish you all the best. Enjoy your stay.
And I was the first person here today. I even got here before, well, I think the Consul General was here, but there were just a couple of her assistants. And the reason for that is simply that I live in Charlottesville, Virginia. And I was scared to death by the traffic around this city. So I did very well. And I want to say that... Pardon me?
Show up on time.
Yes, I was teasing. I think Susan Hitz-Scholl deserves an enormous vote of appreciation, which we can give by our hands. I'm sure the Swiss organizers of the last reunion know how hard it is to keep or pull together a family that has drifted apart physically and may be in irregular contact with one another, and get them all to come to one place. When I heard Susan and Betsy say that they wanted to do this at the end of July in Washington, I said, are you kidding me? Our grandfather, whom I'm going to speak about at length a little later, lived in Washington at a time before air conditioning. And he made it a point to get out of town in early June and not return until the heat broke in September. And I'm sure all of you have heard the stories about the British paying their diplomats hardship pay to come live in Washington. But Susan's faith was borne out. We've had more rain this summer and cooler temperatures for this time of year than I can recall. So the gods are with us.
Good job with the weather. Good job with the weather, Susan.
My assignment this morning is to talk a little bit about Landesmann Hans Hitz, and I have to tell you that I know less about the founding member of our family who came to this country than is set forth in this program. So I'm not going to go into any of the details that are set forth there. Suffice it to say, I've had the pleasure, with my wife Mary Buford, who could join us today, of visiting Klosters and visiting the surrounding region, and in fact developing a contact before she died with a member of our family, Nina Hitz, who was a kindergarten teacher and who walked us around the town, even showing us the residence in sort of the older part of Klosters, if there is such a thing anymore, with Hans Hitz's name along the roof line. These mines were called silver mines. They were in fact lead mines, and it's just hard for me to believe what a shock it must have been with the numbers of people that were employed in that industry, for Landman Hans Hitz to conclude that there was no point in continuing. The mines would have to close. And he left Switzerland and came to Virginia. We assume that he came to the District of Columbia, but he didn't. He came to Virginia because he was looking to continue his job as a mining engineer. And there were deposits of lead and other precious minerals in the part of Virginia that he first settled in, around Fredericksburg. There is a town that you Virginians in the audience are probably familiar with called Mineral. That was it. And of course, all along the Blue Ridge, there are these furnaces of barely mineable amounts of iron and some coal. So that was the first landing point. And as the excerpt in your program says, there came a time when he was induced to move to the District of Columbia to look for some, or get close to the District of Columbia to continue the mining activity there. And it was there that his son, John, became involved with the government. I don't know whether we're doing it, Susan. There's a portrait in the Capitol that pictures John Hitz, the Consul General, standing along President Lincoln at the time of the second inaugural. He was a known figure in this city. I'm going to leave that to Betsy, who's going to talk about him. The fact of the matter is, our branch of the Hitz family had been in and around D.C. since Landman Hans Hitz moved there from Fredericksburg. And that's an important factor. Washington was a very small town until the New Deal, until President Roosevelt came in at the time of the Depression. And the government in Washington has grown since and continues to grow. Secondly, and I think this was pointed out to me by Betsy and Susan and Isabel as a consequence of their visit with the Swiss families, Hitz families, that there is a remarkable concentration of professions in the family. We are professional people. We are doctors, lawyers, Indian chiefs. But you can add one underlining to that. Most of the Hitz family have been in government service and in public service and in the federal service. And those of you who are familiar with current events, I teach this. I teach a course on leadership at the University of Virginia. My new dean there says, in trying to encourage our students to go into the government, we're pushing on an open door. I'm not so sure. But I think it's important to note, and it's been noted by Princeton University in an article they wrote about my father and Susan and Betsy's father, and a little bit about my career, that we have continued the tradition of government service. Why don't I sit down and shut up, and I will talk about my grandfather, William Hitz, in a while, and turn this platform over to Betsy. I think you're up next, aren't you, Betsy? You are.
Good morning. For those of you who were not on the bus when I introduced myself, I'm Betsy Gooding. My maiden name was Hitz, and I'm Susan's sister. I'm so pleased that my two children are here today, Lizzie and Vaughn. We live in Rhode Island. We were fortunate enough to go to the first International Hitz Convention in 2004 that Katharina and Martin Hitz organized, and I hope you all remember a lot about that. They were then nearly the youngest there, and when we were all there together, we had the idea that it would be so nice to perpetuate some sort of gathering in the future so that the younger generation doesn't lose track of one another and that we can keep this going. And we envisioned even exchanges taking place, whether going to do a semester abroad or coming to vacation. And we've been very fortunate to continue that association with Katharina and Martin and Constantine and Hannah. My daughter Lizzie just returned from nearly 2 weeks in Austria as their guest. They have been, Hannah was a nanny to my cousin Izzy's daughter, Perry. So it is happening already, and I hope that this can be a catalyst for this to kind of spread out and continue. So my task today is to speak a bit about John Hitz. He was the middle generation of immigrants who came from Switzerland here. To back up a little bit, as Fred said, you can read about Landemann Hans Hitz in your program, but I'm going to start with John. John Hitz, who was born in 1797, was my great-great-grandfather. He was born in Klosters and was the only son of Hans, who's also known as Landemann Hans Hitz, and Christina Brosi. He was one of 10 children, though only John and 3 of the sisters survived to adulthood. He was well educated. He was trained in graduate school to be a mining engineer. After graduation, he returned home to Klosters, where he was a schoolmaster for a brief time. He courted and married Anna Kohler, who was said to be the belle of the town. Very gentle person, very altruistic, had a good character. She also worked for his father, Hans Hitz, presumably in the mines, since that was, or presumably in the office of the mining business, since that was his trade. They were married in 1820. Both of them at the time were 23. As a young mining engineer, John Hitz became foreman of the mines and blast furnaces that his father managed throughout the region. They were, of the day, large-scale mining operations. He saw to it that the mines provided year-round employment opportunity for as many as possible. He was known to have a good heart, like a philanthropist, but without a lot of money. And so there were a lot of employees, and so when they ultimately were not able to extract enough from the mines and they folded, a lot of people lost. Investors lost. People lost jobs. The Hitzes lost their jobs, and that's really what spurred the immigration of them, turning this tremendous setback into an opportunity that, in a sense, brought us all here today. So it was in March 1831 that 3 generations of the Hitz family left Switzerland. Now I'm trying to picture this, what it must have been like to cross the mountains with 13 people on horse-drawn carts. At the very least, it was mud season. Probably there was a lot of snow on the ground. It evidently was an arduous trip across the mountains to Paris and then to the port of Le Havre on the coast, where they boarded, I don't know, a schooner, a clipper ship, I'm not sure in the 1830s what kind of vessel transported them, but I do know it was a 48-day crossing to New York City, which is a long, they were either becalmed a lot or they made stops along the way, but a darn long trip. It was 4 months in all from the time that they left home until they arrived in New York City. They got there in early June aboard the vessel La France. Picture this, in 1831, the United States was 55 years old. Andrew Jackson was president, our 7th president. The population of the United States then was around 13 million, of which 2 million were slaves. The geographical epicenter of the United States then was Western Virginia, I guess what is now West Virginia. So, and there were only 26 states. So their port of entry was the United States. They stayed there a matter of weeks. They took up very modest lodgings in Hoboken, what is now Hoboken, New Jersey. Very sadly, within 2 months of their arrival, 2 of Hans Hitz's children had died, as well as his adult sister. So the 13 who came, they were down to 10 within 2 months. So they were in New York City. They carried with them letters of introduction from well-placed friends at home who were warmly received by Adrian Iceland in New York. I think the Hitz story throughout is a story of Swiss helping their fellow Swiss, both coming and going. There also were trips in later generations back, and it seems that they would do most anything they could to help Swiss in need, but also help them get a leg up as they made a new beginning in another part of this country. Let's see. Mr. Iceland was the one who connected Hans Hitz and his father, and his son John, to the mining operations in Virginia that Fred spoke about. They moved to Fredericksburg, where John spent the next 4 years as a mining inspector and manager, and ultimately they opened up a gold mine. I don't know that we ever saw the money from the gold mine, but he had something to do with it. In the meantime, his parents and siblings moved to Washington, D.C., where they set up a large dairy farm. In 1835, 4 years after their arrival, he received a call from a fellow Swiss named Rudolf Hasler, who was then superintendent for weights and measures in the United States. And this is probably something for which John Hitz is best known today, was developing the process to extract zinc from ore and to develop from that the brass castings that became the first unit of U.S. weights and measures in the United States. If you see an assayer's office, or maybe you've seen even in antique shops the scales and these very precise brass, ingots or things, that is what he was able to develop through the technology, and that was in use until 1851. After this success, John Hitz turned again to mining in Virginia and in New York. In 1840, he briefly took over the dairy farm at the time of his father's death. He became an advisor to the U.S. Patent Office and to the Director of Mines. In 1850, he opened a dry goods store in Washington with his brother-in-law, Florian Hitz. Go figure, you know, he was a man of many trades. John and Anna moved to Capitol Hill, which was then the center of activity at the time. The Washington Monument was under construction at that time, and at the suggestion of John Hitz and others, the Swiss government sent a great slab of granite to the United States to be set in the Washington Monument with the inscription, "To the memory of Washington from the Free Swiss Confederation, 1852." In 1853, Switzerland created the post of Swiss consul in Washington and appointed John Hitz its first consul. This was then Switzerland's highest-ranking diplomatic post in the United States. The consulate was headquartered at his house at 29 A Street, Southeast. Now that you will find in your map. Susan has painstakingly put on that map inside your program different historic points that are relevant to our family. Are we going to go there? Oh, okay. Although no salary was provided, John Hitz worked vigorously to aid and support Swiss immigrants living in the United States. When the Civil War broke out, most foreign diplomats remained neutral. And today we would have thought that a Swiss diplomat in particular would have remained neutral. But John was a very outspoken person, and he was a vocal supporter of the Union cause. His independence, humility, intelligence, and warmth earned him the respect of Secretary of State William Seward and President Abraham Lincoln. Throughout the war, John and Anna Hitz spent countless days in Army camps and hospitals in and around Washington, comforting wounded soldiers. John's greatest achievement as Swiss consul was securing federal pensions and death benefits for Swiss soldiers and their surviving families. His presence on this front called attention to the sacrifices that the Swiss made for the Union and earned him recognition as a great humanitarian. Anecdotally, a story that was told to me in my childhood, and I have not found any other references to it, was that so often there were translation problems. Swiss soldiers who were either conscripted or had somehow found themselves in the Civil War were often unable to speak English and at great risk because they couldn't understand orders. So there were issues of desertions for which they would be tried and hanged, and he was able to prevail on their behalf to later translate and take up their cause and say, the guy just did not know which way to run, which way to fire, but he was known to be someone who could be counted on when people were in need. Let's see. In 1864, at the age of 67, John Hitz died, reportedly from overexertion in carrying out his duties. His funeral was attended by Abraham Lincoln, Secretary Seward, cabinet members, foreign ministers, and legions of those whom he had helped. In his will, he bequeathed considerable funds to establish a Swiss benevolent society in the United States, to create children's programs, and a welfare fund in Klosters and Davos to compensate creditors who had supported his father's failed mining activities in Switzerland. That impressed me. I thought that they had come here and made a new start, but he still tried to repay those who had lost money. His wife, Anna, lived to the age of 87. 20 years later, she died. She was affectionately known as Mother Hitz in the camps and hospitals during the Civil War. She spoke several languages and was often summoned to translate and give comfort to wounded soldiers when no one could understand them. Although she bore 16 children, only 5 lived to adulthood. I wondered, as I was researching John and Anna's history, if perhaps the grief and loss that they experienced made them more empathetic to the needs of others. Amid tragedy, they always managed to find the seeds of renewal and to extend a hand to others. Anna Hitz and John Hitz are buried at Congressional Cemetery here in the Capitol, and that's one of the stops today, tomorrow, on our bus tour. So, thank you.
Hi, I'm June Vale, and I'm the daughter of a daughter of a daughter of a Hitz, so my name is not Hitz. But I'm here to talk to you today about John Hitz Jr., the son of the John Hitz that Hetzel was talking about, and also his daughter, Gertrude.
Can you lower your microphone?
Gertrude Hitz Burton. John Hitz Jr. Lived from 1828 till 1908, and his daughter, Gertrude, 1861 to 1896. And just to introduce this, for about the past 8 years, I've been researching the connections in Gertrude's life. I'm working on a book right now. And because I've been sort of living with her for a while, I've also been living with her father because their lives were very much entwined. They were very, very close with each other, and they influenced each other quite a lot. So I'm really happy to be able to share with you some of what I've learned, and really aware of how much I'm leaving out too in talking about them. And I've decided just to sort of tell the story without going into a lot of detail, but I'm happy to answer any questions anytime that come up. So, do I aim this at this?
You don't have to aim.
I just have to.
Yeah. Boom. You did it.
This is Washington pre-Civil War, 1859. This is sort of stumpy Washington monument in this picture. But as both Fred and Betsy referred to, Washington was a very small town, and it was a place that John Hitz moved to after he had been apprenticed to a piano maker and tuner and music professor in Baltimore. A lot of the Hitz Center was in Maryland and Virginia before they came to Washington. And John Hitz Jr. was trained, that's what he was trained to do. He was trained to make musical instruments, basically. And by the time of the Civil War, they had settled, however, in Capitol Hill, which was described as the Capitol Hill community typified the values of a secure, permanent population in houses of modest cost, durability, and restraint and detail. And the house at 29A Street that we referred to is really sort of in the middle today, in the middle of the Library of Congress. That's where the house was. It doesn't exist now because so many of the public buildings that were built on the east side of Capitol Hill were built over that area. In 1849, when John Hitz was just 21 years old, an amateur phrenologist felt the bumps on his head and reported that his strongest attributes were moral sentiment, benevolence, destructiveness, and constructiveness. And that kind of duality, I think, was really part of John Hitz's personality. He was a mensch. He was really a person who could make connections very easily. And he was also, that strength was also his weakness. He also suffered from severe bad judgment sometimes about people. He didn't know how to judge them. But in general, the phrenologist said, a very good head. The moral and intellectual faculties preponderate over the animal propensity. This is John Hitz at 20. He went to California in 1850, a year after the big gold rush, and he stayed there for 3 years, and he did not come back any wealthier than he was when he left, but he had an adventure. And when he came back, he moved in with his father at 29 A Street on Capitol Hill, and he established a musical instrument business with a partner, Hitz and Hilbus, in 1853. Which went under in 1855. They were deeply in debt when it stopped. So that's also sort of a repeating theme. But he courted Jane Catherine Shanks, and she was the daughter of a real estate magnate in Washington, Michael Shanks. And he asked for Jane, he called her Kate, Kate's hand, and the father said absolutely not, because he had no career prospects at age 27. But Kate was 18, and she was a very strong-willed girl, and they eloped. And they eloped to Baltimore, where they were married, and they had no family there. The minister's daughter wife was the witness. And eventually, though, they returned to Washington when the Southern secession became very strong. After having given music lessons for a couple of years, he decided to return to Washington with his wife and his first daughter, whose name was Kate Joanna, in 1857. So that was before the Civil War. And when he came home that time, he joined his father as his father's secretary. Basically, he helped him out with a lot of the sort of logistical work that his father was performing for the Union Army as the war developed. And in 1861, the second daughter, Gertrude, was born. And at the end of that year, in 1861, the first daughter died at age 3.5. So Gertrude was the surviving daughter at that point. And this is a picture of the cottage on Capitol Hill where John and Jane Catherine Hitz lived. It's sort of at the intersection of Pennsylvania Avenue and 6th. The Hitzes owned several houses, but on the back of this picture is written, "The house from which Kate left me." And we know that they lived in this house for 20 years before she left. And 2 additional daughters were born here and died. And his son, William, was also born here. So Gertrude and William were the 2 surviving children. And William was born in 1872, about whom you will learn more from Fred later. When Kate left, John Hitz lived here himself in the attic and rented out the rooms on the bottom floor. And then he eventually moved out. But this is what this corner looks like today. And you'll see this tomorrow. I really wanted to show some pictures of the old Washington because I have fallen in love with the old Washington. And this shows the block of Pennsylvania Avenue between 9th and 10th. The address is 925 Pennsylvania Avenue. And you can see that the Steinway pianos there, this building is called Metzgerot Hall. The land and the building were originally owned by Michael Shanks, Kate Shanks' father, the real estate magnate. And on the bottom floor was this music store, friend and a very close friend of John Hitz's and associate. On the second floor was a meeting hall where all kinds of meetings were held, including the Feather Duster Parliament, if you remember that term from your history classes in high school. It was Washington's attempt at self-rule. Anyway, they met here. And on the third floor were artist studios and photographer studios. And you can see the dark room, the place on your right where the dark rooms were. Anyway, this building is important for the Hitz family, and in one other way it's important because when it was raised in 1963, this is what was built.
Wow.
It was the J. Edgar Hoover FBI building. And so you can see the contrast there. Also very connected to our family, since J. Edgar Hoover was the great nephew of John Hitz, the son of his sister Margaret, and no, the grandson of his sister Margaret, and the son of Annie Scheitman Hoover. The Swiss consular office was at the corner of 10th and Pennsylvania Avenue for a time. It moved in and out of Hitz houses and other places, but this was the consular office in 1881. I know that for sure. I don't know exactly what the time period was, but it stayed the consular office until after 1881, when the first official legation sent someone from Switzerland to come. The themes of family and fatherland, or Switzerland, were really intertwined. This is a photograph taken in 1891 on August 1st, which is the Swiss National Day. It was a picnic held to celebrate the Swiss National Day.